The first time Eli Mercer dragged that rust-streaked stove pipe up the hill, the laughter came easy. It floated across the holler in thin, brittle strands, carried by the November wind like dry leaves skittering over frozen ground. Eli pretended not to hear it, though every chuckle landed square in the middle of his back. He leaned into the load anyway, boots grinding against gravel and old coal slag, breath puffing white in the early morning air. "Hey, Eli," someone hollered from down by the fence line. "You plannin' to cook rocks up there now?" A few more voices joined in, snorts, someone clapped slow and sarcastic. Eli didn't turn around. He hadn't turned around in 3 years. Not since the mine shut down, not since his wife packed the kids into her sister's minivan and headed east, not since this ridge above Black Willow, West Virginia, became the only place that felt solid under his feet. Turning around meant explaining himself, and Eli Mercer was done explaining. The land had come with the house. House was generous. It was a one-room structure slapped together from scavenged lumber and corrugated metal, sitting crooked on concrete blocks like a tired old dog refusing to lie down. The previous owner called it a hunting shack. Eli called it shelter. Winter was coming early this year. Everyone said so. The kind of winter that crept into your bones and stayed there, the kind that split wood with a sound like gunfire and killed furnaces in the night. Eli had learned to listen to those signs back when he was a boy, trailing his father through snowdrifts taller than fence posts. The stovepipe was his answer. He reached the rock pile at the crest of the hill and dropped the pipe with a hollow clang. The pile itself looked like nothing special, just a mound of field stones hauled up over decades by hands long gone. It sat downhill from the shack, half-collapsed, gray and brown and heavy as time. Eli wiped his gloves on his jeans and crouched, running a hand over the stones. They were cold now. By morning they wouldn't be. That was the idea anyway. The neighbors didn't know what he knew. They saw a man who'd lost everything trying to outthink winter with junk and stubbornness. They didn't see the nights Eli spent lying awake, listening to the stove burn hot and fast, then die out before dawn. They didn't feel the way cold crept across the floorboards, up his calves into his chest, until breathing felt like swallowing ice. Inside the shack, the old cast-iron stove squatted in the corner like a black toad. Eli had pulled it from a demolished farmhouse 2 miles away, hauling it piece by piece on a sled. It worked fine, too fine. It burned through wood like a drunk through whiskey. He'd defeat it at midnight, at 2, at 4, and still wake up at 6 to a room cold enough to see his breath. That was when he remembered his father's voice. "Heat don't just gotta be made," he'd said once, tapping the stone foundation of their old place with a boot heel. "It's gotta be held." Eli had been 10, bored, wanting to get back to his comic books. Now at 43, that sentence lived in his skull. He spent the day digging. By noon, his shoulders screamed and his fingers tingled despite the gloves. He carved a shallow trench from the shack to the rock pile just wide enough for the pipe. The soil was stubborn, laced with roots and frozen clods that resisted every swing of the shovel. Sweat soaked his shirt even as the air hovered near freezing. When Marlene Haskins wandered up the hill with her little white dog tucked under one arm, Eli didn't look up right away. He heard her boots before he saw her, city boots clean out of place. "You building a chimney for the earth now?" she asked, voice light but sharp around the edges. Eli paused, resting his weight on the shovel. "Something like that." Marlene tilted her head, squinting at the pipe, the trench, the stones. She'd moved into the only renovated house in the holler 2 years ago, working remote for some company out of DC. Folks never let her forget it. "You know heat rises, right?" she said. Eli nodded. "Sure does. And rocks are cold. Only till they ain't." She laughed, a quick sound, then seemed to catch herself. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, I don't want to see you freeze up here." He met her eyes then, there was something genuine there tucked behind the skepticism. "I won't," he said. Marlene hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself, just don't burn the place down." By late afternoon, the pipe was laid, snaking from the back of the stove through a hole Eli cut low in the wall, then underground and into the heart of the rock pile. He stacked the stones back around it carefully, sealing gaps with clay and dirt. It looked ridiculous, he could admit that much, like some metal vein feeding into a stone heart. Down below, someone whistled. "Hey, Mercer," a voice called, "you gonna patent that thing?" More laughter. Eli ignores. Edit. He sealed the final stone, stood back and studied his work. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. Cold rushed in to take its place. He went inside and lit the stove. The fire caught fast, flames licking the iron, heat blooming quick and fierce. Eli fed it until the stove sang, until the pipe grew warm to the touch. He stepped outside, crouched by the rock pile, and laid his palm against the stones. Nothing. He waited. Minutes passed, then longer. Doubt crept in, soft and insistent. Maybe they were right. Maybe he'd spent weeks chasing a memory that didn't translate to now. Maybe this hill would claim another winter victory. Then there it was. A faint warmth, so subtle he almost missed it. The stones closest to the pipe were losing their bite, the cold retreating inch by inch. Eli smiled just a little. Night fell hard. Wind rattled the shack, howling through the trees like something alive and angry. Eli fed the stove one last time around midnight, then lay down on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. He slept. That alone was a miracle. He woke just before dawn, heart hammering, expecting the familiar shock of cold. Instead, he felt comfortable, not hot, not cold, just steady. Eli sat up. The stove was dark, ashes cold. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The rock pile steamed faintly in the morning air, heat rising slow and patient like breath. Down in the holler, a porch light flicked on, a door opened. Someone stopped and stared. Eli stood there, hands on his hips, chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to hope. By the second morning, the laughter had changed. It didn't disappear, not yet, but it shifted, took on a different weight, less sharp, more curious. Eli felt it in the way truck engines idled longer at the base of the hill, in the way voices dropped when he stepped into view. He was splitting wood when he noticed it first, the axe biting clean through oak with a crack that echoed off the ridge. The rock pile behind him was still warm. Not blazing, not steaming now, just holding, like a banked fire that refused to die. Eli rested his hands on the axe handle and let himself breathe. For the first time since he'd moved up here, winter didn't feel like a countdown clock ticking above his head. It felt manageable, and that scared him more than the cold ever had. Because hope was fragile. He knew better than to trust a single night. The day crept by under a slate-gray sky. Clouds rolled low, thick and heavy, promising snow by nightfall. Eli reinforced the pipe joints, packed more clay into the rock pile, and added a crude metal cap to the outlet vent to keep moisture out. Every step was careful, deliberate. If this thing failed, it would fail when he needed it most. Around noon, old Raymond Klein made the climbs. Raymond was a fixture in Black Willow, a retired electrician with a bent spine and a stare that could peel paint. He de-worked the mine 30 years before Eli ever set foot underground. When Raymond spoke, people listened. He stopped halfway up the hill, leaned on his cane, and eyed the setup without saying a word. Eli kept working. Finally, Raymond cleared his throat. You got a draft problem. Eli paused, had ones. Raymond squinted at the pipe's angle, the stone pack, the outlet vent. You run in smoke through there all night. Heat, Eli said, smoke's mostly gone by the time it hits the rocks. Raymond grunted. He stepped closer, ignoring the slick ground, and laid his palm on the stones. His eyebrows lifted just a hair. Well, I'll be damned. That was all he said before turning and heading back down the hill. By evening, the snow came. It didn't drift in soft flakes the way it did in postcards. It came sideways, sharp and stinging, driven by a wind that howled like it had a grudge. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of drop you felt in your teeth. Eli fed the stove heavier than usual. He wasn't taking chances. He watched the pipe glow dull red near the stove, then fade as it disappeared into the wall. Outside, the rock pile absorbed it all in silence. The power went out just after 9. Down in the holler, lights blinked off one by one. A transformer popped somewhere in the distance, followed by a low murmur of frustration that carried on the wind. Eli stood in his doorway and watched the darkness settle like a blanket. He went to bed early. Sometime after midnight, he woke to shouting. At first, he thought he was dreaming, old mine memories bleeding through. Then he heard it again, a woman's voice tight with panic. Help, somebody help. Eli was on his feet in seconds, boots half-laced as he shoved open the door. Snow blasted his face, icy needles biting into his skin. Down the hill, a flashlight beam swung wildly. Marlene's, he shouted. Her reply came thin and shaking. My furnace quit, it's freezing, I can't. Eli didn't wait. He grabbed his coat, his spar, gloves, and ran. Her house was already dropping temperature fast. The modern insulation only held so long without heat. Her little dog shivered in a blanket, eyes wide and confused. Marlene herself looked pale, wrapped in layers that weren't enough. "My phone's almost dead," she said, voice cracking. "The roads are bad, I didn't know who else to." "You're coming with me," Eli said. She hesitated. "Your place. Only warm one on the ridge right now." He bundled the dog inside his coat, took her arm, and led her uphill through the storm. The wind fought them every step. By the time they reached the shack, Marlene was trembling hard enough to make her teeth chatter. The moment she stepped inside, she stopped. The air was warm. Not stifling, not smoky, just warm, steady, and alive. Heat pressed gently against her face, her hands, her chest. She let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. "How?" she whispered. Eli shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Rocks." She laughed, then really laughed, and sank onto the chair by the stove, holding her dog close. "I thought you were crazy." "Most folks do." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind batter the walls. The stove burned low, almost lazy, yet the room stayed comfortable. Outside, the rock pile glowed faintly under its coat of snow, radiating its stored warmth back toward the shack. By morning, the storm had buried Black Willow. Cars were stranded, power lines sagged under ice. Folks huddled in cold houses, burning through backup heaters and firewood fast. Word spread quick, too quick. By noon, there were boots on the hills. Two men from down the road, a young couple with a baby bundled tight. Old Mrs. Calder leaning on her grandson's arm. They didn't laugh now, they didn't joke. They asked. Eli let them warm up. He gave out coffee, shared what space he could, but the shack was small, too small for what was coming. He could feel it in the way people looked at the rock pile, in the way their eyes lingered, calculating. That afternoon, someone knocked hard. Eli opened the door to find Deputy Harris, snow caked on his hat, face tight with concern. "Eli," he said, lowering his voice. "County S asking questions. Folks are saying you've got some kind of system up here." Eli frowned. "It's just heat." Harris nodded. "Problem is people are cold and scared, and when that happens, things get messy." As if on cue, a voice rose from below, angry, accusatory. "You hoarding heat up there, Mercer." Eli stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding. Down the hill, a small crowd had gathered, faces red from cold, eyes sharp with something close to desperation. "No," Eli said loud enough for them all to hear, "I'm surviving." The wind carried his words away, but the tension stayed. Eli looked at the rock pile, at the pipe, at the fragile miracle he'd built. For the first time since it worked, he wondered what it might cost him. By the third night, Black Willow felt like a pressure cooker with the lid clamped tight. The snow didn't stop. It settled layer over layer until fences vanished and porches became islands. The temperature sank into numbers people only talked about in past tense. Diesel gelled, firewood stacks collapsed under ice. The radio crackled with warnings and nothing else. Eli hadn't slept. He sat at his small table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, listening to the sounds outside, boots crunching, voices muttering, the restless shuffling of people who'd run out of patience. Marlene slept on the narrow cot with her dog curled against her chest, exhaustion finally claiming her. The knock came just after midnight. Not a polite one. A heavy, deliberate pounding that rattled the door in its frame. Eli stood slowly. His joints ached, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios he didn't want to land on. He opened the door a crack. Deputy Harris stood there again, this time flanked by two men Eli knew too well, Cal Porter and his brother Dean. Both were built like oak stumps, faces red from cold and anger. "We need to talk," Harris said. Cal didn't wait. "My pipes froze solid," he snapped. "Kids are crying, house is at 40 degrees, and you're sitting up here like it's summer." Eli felt the heat of the room spill out into the night. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "I didn't steal anything from you," Eli said evenly. "No," Dean said, stepping closer. "You just figured something out and kept it to yourself." "I didn't even know if it would work." "But it does," Cal said, "and you knew it would." That wasn't fair. Eli opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because part of him had believed quietly, desperately, that it might. Harris raised a hand. Enough, nobody's here to start trouble, but the county wants to know if this setup is safe. Eli laughed once, sharp and humorless. Safe compared to what? Kerosene heaters tipping over in living rooms, people burning furniture. Cowles J. All worked, you got enough heat for more than just you. The words hung there, heavy as the snow-laden branches above them. Eli looked past them down the hill where more figures gathered in the dark. Lantern light bobbed, faces watched, waiting. This was it. He could feel the old instincts rising, the ones that had kept him alive underground. Protect your air, protect your light, trust no one when things start to fail. But this wasn't a mine collapse. This was his community. Come inside, he said finally. They crowded into the shack, boots steaming, breath fogging. The warmth hit them like a wall. Someone swore under their breath. Cal's shoulders sagged despite himself. Eli pointed to the rock pile through the window. That's not magic, it's just storage. The stove heats the pipe heats the rocks give it back slow. Dane frowned, so why can't we do it too? You can, Eli said, but not tonight, not without tools, not without time. Cal's eyes flicked to the stove, calculating again, then share. Marlene stirred, sitting up. He's already sharing, she said. This place can't hold everyone. Outside, a shout cut through the wind. We're freezing out here. The crowd pressed closer. Eli felt the ground shift under his feet, not physically, but something deeper. The careful balance he'd built was tipping. A sudden crack echoed through the night. Everyone froze. Another crack, sharper this time. A tree, heavy with ice, split and came down hard against the side of the shack. The impact knocked dust from the ceiling and sent a ripple of panic through the room. In that instant, the choice was made for him. If you're gonna build these, Eli said, voice cutting through the chaos, you gotta start now. Harris stared at him. What are you saying? I'll show you, Eli said, all of you, but we do it together. The hill turned into a work site. Lanterns lit the snow in shaky halos as people hauled pipe, dug trenches, dragged stones. Complaints turned into grunts, then into rhythm. Hands numbed, tempers flared. But something else happened too, something Eli hadn't felt in years. Purpose spread. Cal worked beside Eli, silent but focused. Dean learned fast, asking the right questions. Even Harris shed his jacket and grabbed a shovel. Marlene coordinated coffee and blankets, moving through the crowd like she'd always belonged there. At one point, Eli looked up to see nearly the whole holler on the hill, neighbors who hadn't spoken in years, families bound by cold and necessity. The wind howled, but the work didn't stop. Just before dawn, the first new rock pile began to steam. A cheer went up, raw, exhausted, triumphant. Eli leaned on his shovel, chest heaving, eyes burning. Heat radiated from the stones, proof that the idea held even beyond him. Then the fire in his own stove sputtered. Eli turned, heart droppings. The pipe joint near the wall glowed too bright, too hot. Everybody back, he shouted. A sharp hiss filled the air, clay cracked, smoke curled where it shouldn't. If that pipe failed, the shack would go up, and with it, the only proven system they had. Eli lunged forward, hands bare, grabbing the pipe despite the searing pain. He wrenched it loose, rolled in the snow, and jammed it back into place, packing it with wet clay as steam exploded around him. The world narrowed to heat and pain and breaths. When it was over, he lay there shaking, hands blistered, smoke fading into the night. Someone knelt beside him, then another, then many. The system held. The rock piles glowed across the hill like buried embers, pushing back the cold inch by inch. Eli closed his eyes, unsure if he was laughing or crying. Morning didn't arrive so much as it revealed itself. The storm had finally burned itself out, leaving Black Willow buried beneath a silence so deep it rang in Eli Mercer's ears. The sky was pale and clean, a hard winter blue that made every breath feel earned. Smoke rose in thin, steady lines from places that had never smoked before, not chimneys exactly, but rock piles half buried in snow, steaming like the land itself had decided to stay alive. Eli woke on the shack floor, his jacket folded under his head. His hands throbbed in time with his pulse, wrapped in makeshift bandages that smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. For a long moment, he didn't move. He listened. No wind screaming, no angry voices, just the low murmur of people outside talking in tired, amazed tones. He sat up slowly. Marlene was at the stove, coaxing it back to life with practiced care. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, soft and relieved. You scared the hell out of us. Eli flexed his fingers and winced. Still got M. Barely, she said, but they'll heal. Outside, Cal Porter stood near the rock pile, hands outstretched like a man warming himself at a campfire. When he saw Eli step out, he straightened and nodded once, a small gesture but heavy with meaning. Avenzi. County Truck S on the way, Cal said. Plows 2, roads should open by noon. Eli nodded. The crisis, the raw, gnawing edge of it had passed. But something else lingered in the air now, something warmer than heat. Gratitude. People came up to him one by one. Mrs. Calder pressed his arm and whispered, "You saved us." The young couple thanked him through tears, their baby asleep and pink-cheeked against his mother's chest. Even Dean, who'd never been good with words, clapped Eli on the shoulder and muttered, "Didn't think I'd see something like that again." Deputy Harris approached last, his official hat tucked under his arm. "County's gonna ask you to explain this," he said, "maybe even write it up." Eli huffed a laugh. "I barely finished high school." Harris smiled. "Doesn't matter, you figured out what works." By the time the plows arrived, the hill looked different, not just altered, claimed. What had been Eli's lonely experiment had become a shared landscape, dotted with stone mounds that held the night at bay. Folks packed up their tools slowly, reluctant to leave the warmth and each other. As the day wore on, something unexpected happened. Nobody went home right away. They stayed talking, planning, arguing gently about improvements, safety, how to help the folks farther down the valley. Someone mentioned turning the old community center into a warming hub. Someone else talked about teaching the kids why the rocks worked, how heat moved and waited if you treated it right. Eli stood on the edge of it all, stunned. 3 years ago, he'd come up this hill to disappear. Now he was being pulled back in. That afternoon, Marlene walked with him down to her house. The furnace was still dead, but the rock pile they'd built out back radiated a steady warmth into the foundation. The little dog trotted happily through the snow, tail high. "I was wrong about you," she said as they stood there. Eli shrugged. "Most folks are." "No," she said, smiling. "I thought you were hiding. Turns out you were just waiting." They stood in comfortable silence. A week later, the story reached beyond Black Willow. A regional paper ran a piece, "Hillbilly Heatsink Keeps Hollow Alive During Deep Freeze." Eli hated the headline, but the photos told the truth. Neighbors working side by side, steam rising from stone, children laughing in borrowed warmth. Calls came in from other towns, then from a university, then from a nonprofit focused on rural resilience. Eli didn't answer most of them. He did, however, agree to one thing. On a bright, brittle Saturday, he stood in front of the community center with a crowd gathered close, hands in pockets, eyes bright with curiosity. He held up a short length of stovepipe, scarred and blackened. "This ain't about being clever," he said. "It's about paying attention. Heat wants to rise, stone wants to hold, you just gotta give M a way to meet." People nodded, took notes, asked questions. Eli answered everyone's. That night he returned to his shack alone. The stove burned low, steady. Outside, the rock pile glowed faintly, doing its quiet work. He sat on the porch and watched the stars prick through the cold sky. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something he could build, slow, deliberate, and shared.